It's all fun and games until the corporations start feeling the pinch in their wallets. Us as consumers have been feeling the pinch in our wallets for a couple years already, but corporations have been riding high on the hog, record corporate profits, and all has been great for them, which probably really helps push along this narrative that the economy is doing so great. Well, that is starting to change because corporate profits are starting to slow down, especially in the first quarter of 2024. Finally. Right now, according to the Commerce Department, corporate profits declined by 0.6% in the first quarter after a 4.1% gain in the prior 3 months. So it was the first decline that we've seen in over a year, and they're saying this is happening because people just don't have the money, guys. People are spending less money everywhere. Everyone's budget is getting spread thinner and thinner across different sectors of the economy, and naturally some people stop spending money altogether on some things, and they lower spending on other things. So it'll be funny to see how soon or how fast this narrative of a strong economy will continue now that businesses and big corporations are starting to feel this cool down, because they're even saying that a cooler economy is limiting these businesses' ability to raise prices, which will help slow inflation in the second half of the year. So yeah, this is a good thing for inflation. As far as slowing it down, it's not going to reverse it, but it will slow it down. However, these corporations still got it good because this is just the beginning of the slowdown for them, because the corporate profits are still up 7.2% on a year-over-year basis, but it's starting to head in the wrong direction for them. And also all these companies that were enjoying the practice of greedflation during the past couple of years, leaving their prices artificially higher than they need to be to squeeze out that extra profit margin, isn't working anymore because people simply don't have the cash to pay those higher prices. So you're already seeing this happen in the fast food industry and with the big retailers like Walmart and Target. Like, these guys are now reversing the trends altogether. They are starting to hop on a race to the bottom, guys. You're seeing McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King and all these big fast food restaurants come out with all these deals to try to lure people back in the stores. You're seeing Target start to do this now with their merchandise, lowering the price on over 5,000 items from between now and the end of the year. Walmart has always usually had the lowest price on a lot of things, and they've been keeping competitive with keeping people coming in the store with the groceries. So gone are the days where they can just gouge the consumer who is flush with cash and able to just put more and more stuff on credit, because that's just not going to be possible moving forward. Now, people look at this a couple different ways. You have one set of people out there that say whenever the Trump tax cuts expire, that we should force corporations to pay more, and especially since they were able to get away with all this greedflation over the past couple of years. But we already know when it just comes to economics, the more you raise taxes, the less productive an economy becomes, and therefore it's usually not very good when it comes to growth and keeping things moving forward. So raising taxes on these businesses isn't really going to do much to help the economy. All they're going to do, they're just going to pass those increased costs onto you, the consumer, guys. It's just like tariffs. All these politicians think that the answer is tariffs on everything and taxes on everything, but all that does is make the stuff that we buy more expensive, as if anybody wants that. And I realize it's not fair that these big corporations get away with paying, a very low effective tax rate with all of the things they're able to take advantage of and all of this. And somebody who makes $60,000 a year oftentimes is going to pay a higher percentage of their income in tax than somebody like Jeff Bezos. But you can't have it both ways, unfortunately. It's either going to be like that, or they can tax those people to the moon and there'll be far fewer jobs and everything you buy will cost even more. So it's like, what do you want? Do you want to have a less productive economy and charge rich people more? Or do you want to keep it the way it is, try to have corporations as competitive as possible and bring prices down? You're seeing it already, like I said, with McDonald's and Target and these different places that are desperate to get people back in their stores. That's what they're doing, guys. They are being competitive to bring prices down. Even though it might be temporary, it might end up being permanent, because they may realize that's the only way we can keep people coming in through the door. And funny enough, now that corporate profits are starting to suffer in the first quarter of this year, a lot of these companies, they don't want to hire people in the Gen Z generation, guys. And even people who are in charge, people who are Gen Zers that hold, higher up management positions at companies, don't want to hire Gen Zers because of a lot of different reasons, which I thought was kind of funny. So let's go over this. And I'm not really trying to pick on Gen Z. I just saw this story and thought it was interesting. This could be about any other generation, and I would still think it's funny. But a lot of people are complaining about the lack of work ethic with Gen Zers. A lot of people in charge at these companies are saying that they're always late, they don't get their assignments done on time, they just refuse to do certain tasks, like they're just not that productive of employees, so people in general just kind of don't want to hire them. I figured I'd come out to the beach. We just had some rain. Look how empty it is out here, guys, after the rain. Everybody just clears out. So there's a company called Resume Genius, and they asked 625 US hiring managers which generation is the most challenging to work with, and 45% of them pointed to Gen Z. And 50% of Gen Z hiring managers admitted that their own generation is the most difficult to manage. And in contrast to that, they say that baby boomers are the generation that's the easiest to manage out of all of the working generations right now. But the interesting thing is that even though baby boomers are the easiest generation to manage, they're actually the lowest on the totem pole when it comes to hiring people. I've actually heard a bunch of you guys tell me in the comments in one of my recent videos about a lot of retirees that are having to return to work is, yeah, it's one thing to have to return to work. It's a whole nother thing to try to get a job when you're in your late 50s or 60s or beyond. So interestingly enough, even though they don't want to hire Gen Zers, they hire them anyways. They said even though despite Gen Z being the hardest to work with generation, they're the second most likely generation to be hired, and the only ones that stand a better chance of being hired before them are millennials. And don't worry, Gen Xers, you're a distant third. Only 14% of hiring managers expect to hire Gen X workers in the next year. You're kind of like always in that middle ground of the generation, But they say it's easier to manage workers as they get older. So they're thinking maybe that if we hire these guys now while they're young and try to groom them, then eventually they'll be easier to deal with as they age. Because they're doing things like giving these new hires extra training when they're hired in, and they're teaching them things like, how to deal with confrontations, how to speak up in a meeting, stuff like that they may not have learned, especially in college today, where you can't say anything if it doesn't agree with what everybody else around you is thinking. They need to brush up on these skills because of a lot of the COVID lockdowns. A lot of these Gen Zers were, in college or still in high school during these lockdowns and during this period where people weren't really going to work and things like that. So they might lack a lot of the in-person skills that they need at work. But here's the thing, guys, all these Gen Zers, they already got all their money spent. You know why? Because many of them are planning on traveling this summer, and they're going to be paying for it with debt, which means they don't actually have the money, but they see everybody else on Instagram and wherever living the lifestyle of the rich and famous, and they want it too. In fact, it's anticipated that this summer, Gen Zers will contribute to the lion's share of the money that will be made during summer travel. It's not just good enough to go on a simple road trip, do a small little vacation or staycation. No, we have to go international, we have to go big or go home. And going international is not cheap, guys. Maybe once you get to your destination it's cheap, but international travel is very expensive. According to a Bank of America survey of more than 2,000 Americans, it showed that Gen Zs are planning to travel for longer periods and take more expensive vacations at higher rates. And a lot of their mentality is like, well, why am I going to put this off? There could be another pandemic or financial crisis or a war or other major event that can keep me from ever getting there, so I might as well go now while I can. And I think I understand where this younger generation is coming from, especially since, like I said, they kind of came of age during the pandemic, and that was a really weird time to grow up and become an adult and see the world get turned upside down. And you know, it puts a lot of distortions in people's mind of how things should or shouldn't be. It's given them the impression that, like, I better do this now before I can never do it again, you know, because nobody ever thought we were going to see the lockdowns and all the travel restrictions and, you know, the requirement to get vaccinated, all this crap that had to be done in order for people to travel. But the problem is they're going in debt to do this, and that's where I have to start picking on you, because if you can't afford to do something, especially right now, guys, when the cost of living is literally higher than it's ever been, the last thing you should be doing is taking out debt for a vacation. You know, it's one thing to take out debt for a house. You know, everybody needs a place to live, and if you can afford that debt and the payment on the house, even though it's not the greatest time to buy, that's still a much better financial decision than using that debt for a one-time travel experience. I know a lot of people like spending their money on experiences rather than things, but in this case, it's just foolish. And it's not just Gen Z, you know, we're picking on Gen Z here, but really it's my generation of millennials too. You know, 42% of Gen Zers and 47% of millennials say they plan to use debt to finance their summer trips. I mean, take a look at this chart here, guys. It shows you by generation how many people are planning to take a summer trip. That's the darker blue bar. And then the lighter blue colored one is how many plan on using debt to finance the trip. And the numbers are alarming. It's not just Gen Z and millennials, it's also Gen X and boomers, but they're just at a lower percentage, guys. But really, people across the board are guilty of doing this right now. They say the most popular method of financing vacations is whip out the plastic and put it on the credit card. You also have 26% of people saying we're going to use buy now, pay later for it. You also have 8% of people who are going to borrow money from friends and family for this, guys. Like, if you are a family member of somebody who's asking you for money so they can go on vacation while you stay home and work, I hope the answer is a big fat no, because this is ridiculous. And then 5% say, well, we'll just take out a personal loan for it. So all of these things are bad. Obviously, the credit card is the worst one because you're paying the highest amount of interest for the same thing. The thing I don't understand is, why do they feel like they're never going to be able to do it again? Like, yeah, there could be something that comes up that prevents you from doing it temporarily, just like COVID. But like I said, that was temporary. It wasn't like that locked everything down forever. Now everybody's free to go wherever they want again, and it's back to normal. So even when you have a really crazy situation like that, it's usually only temporary. And I never took any trips like this when I was younger, in my 20s, guys. Like, I took one international trip in my 20s, and that was to Brazil with my wife. And believe it or not, it was actually very cheap because, you know, we were just kind of climbing out of the Great Recession and things were just recovering, and it wasn't that expensive to go. And once you get to Brazil, your dollar back then was worth like 3x what their local currency was, so it really went pretty far. And nowadays it's actually even better. It's worth like 5 times more. But traveling and getting there obviously is more expensive than it was before. But that was like the only major trip I ever took in my 20s. Other than that, I was stuck here in Miami working, guys. I had to continue working to pay the bills, okay? And I never wanted to use debt to finance it. So when I did that trip, let's see, it was back in 2014 to 2015, so that was 10 years ago. That would make me 27 years old, okay? And ironically enough, that was the same year that I got out of debt entirely. I had credit card debt just like a lot of people have, and it took me 10 years to get out of it, almost 10 years. I got my first credit card at 18, didn't get out of the credit card debt till 27. And so the last thing I wanted to do was go into more debt to take a vacation. And luckily, you know, I was doing pretty good in real estate at the time, and I was able to make enough money to save for the trip and pay for it without any headaches or going into debt. But I just don't know how people aren't worrying about this. How are you looking at your credit card statement and your balance continuing to go up, and now you have a buy now, pay later loan, you still have student loans and other things to pay for? How do you look at this and all these balances continuing to go up and just be okay with it? I mean, no one's going to pay that off for you. I know a lot of people think that Biden's going to forgive all this debt, but it's probably not going to happen, guys. But I think it all comes back to the doom spending. You know, a lot of the Gen Zs that are surveyed, they don't feel very optimistic about their finances, and they also feel pressure from their friends to take trips that they can't really afford because maybe their friends are little trust fund babies and can do all this without any real trouble. But if you're trying to keep up with people like that and you can't afford it, you're in trouble. And ultimately, guys, I want to pick on the younger generation a little bit in this video just to give you some love, you know, just to let you know that I care. I wouldn't be picking on you if I didn't want the best for you. You know, I'm saying these things because I want people to make good financial decisions, and traveling on someone else's dime, aka debt, is not a good strategy. I know how much it might suck to miss out on a trip that all your friends are going on and looks like, you know, the trip of a lifetime, but believe me, those places will be there when you actually do have the money, and you'll thank me later when you decide to actually save the money for the trip and go on that trip later when you can actually afford it. And I'll even give you an example here from my own life as well, guys. Like this summer, I am going to be spending the summer in California. And believe it or not, it's not really going to cost me that much money because I'm not going to be renting an Airbnb. I'm going to rent a regular apartment, which is going to save me a lot of money right there because I'm so sick of Airbnb, first of all. And I'm just renting a small 1-bedroom apartment. I don't need a big place. It's just me and my wife. I'm not renting anything lavish, but it has everything we need. And because I don't have any other expenses, just my regular living expenses, I have no debt. I have no credit card debt, no student loan payments, no car payment, no payment besides my mortgage, guys. And so because of that, I'm able to save a lot of my income. And because of that savings, it allows me to do things like this and spend the money on things that I enjoy the most, which is getting out of the Miami heat and getting into the nice and cool Bay Area for the summer. That's just something I love to do, and it's worth every penny for me. But it also means that for the rest of the year, I'm not really spending money on anything, guys. I'm not buying stuff, you know, like I don't go out and buy a bunch of new stuff every year for myself. I don't spend a ton of money on clothes. You know, I'm not going out and buying 5 new guitars every year and new equipment and gear. I keep my expenses as low as I really can for living in an expensive area like Miami. And so my wife works also, at least when she's here. And by not having those debts, by not having all these financial obligations that never go away, it allows you to save money and take trips without going into debt. And it's the best feeling ever, knowing that when I go away, I'm not going to be digging myself into a financial hole. I'm going to be enjoying the time away and not being worried in the back of my mind like, oh my God, am I going to be able to afford the payments on all this when I get back? Because, you know, that's going to ruin the trip if you think about that. So rather than be worried about the debt, you should be worried about how you can finance it. And maybe you can be creative. You know, maybe you can, you know, work a couple extra jobs or do some gig work over the next couple of months in anticipation of a trip and save enough money to do it. You don't have to wait necessarily if you can find a way to fund it before it's time to go. But I promise you that if you finance it on debt, you're going to be one of those people that ends up with $20,000 or $30,000 of credit card debt in the next 5 to 10 years, not be able to get out of it, have to claim bankruptcy, and forget about probably being able to buy a house before you're 50 years old, and you're going to be living paycheck to paycheck. So a little bit of sacrifice now will go a long way for you in the future. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.